Alexander Shkudun, the stranger. A man in a black coat strolled leisurely along the park alley. He was short, slender, with jet black hair and European facial features. His eyes were hidden behind large, dark sunglasses. And although the sun had long since disappeared, autumn had arrived early that year, chasing away the warmth and filling the sky with dull gray clouds. The man preferred not to reveal his face entirely to those around him. One could, however, guess why. A scar stretched from his right eye down to almost his neck, crooked, unsightly, as if applied by a makeup artist preparing an actor to play some kind of monster. It even seemed as though the scar had appeared on the stranger's cheek quite recently, from a fresh wound that had not yet fully healed. Passing young couples kept glancing back at him. Elderly people unconsciously stepped aside, and teenagers snickered quietly, imitating the stranger's gait and the stony expression frozen on his face. The man paid them no attention, not because he was used to such treatment, but because he understood them. He shared in human aversion. After all, many years ago he had been exactly the same, shunning anyone who was even slightly flawed. Whether by fate or nature, it didn't matter. He remembered how he had deliberately rolled up the window of his car in front of an old beggar woman whose face looked like a mask from a horror film. He recalled stepping away from a girl with impaired motor skills who had asked him for directions to the theater, and he would never be able to forget the armless Afghan veteran who had once stopped him and his girlfriend on the street asking for some money. The girl had been frightened and had urged him to drive the terrifying man away. Vitaly had been young and hot-tempered, so, without much thought, he had shouted at the veteran and shoved him hard away from the girl, calmly watching as the poor man fell onto the asphalt, hitting his head on the step of a cafe near which they had stopped. Vitaly smiled sadly at those distant times, how young and foolish he had been, how many things he had failed to understand. The alley stretched farther ahead, inviting him toward the Lover's Bridge visible in the distance. On either side, tall pines stood firm and majestic, their mighty branches shielding the paved path from prying eyes. A man walked past, a mobile phone pressed to his ear. A leather jacket, a fine wool blazer, expensive shoes, and a gold watch on his wrist marked him as a businessman, one unaccustomed to compromise.
No, if you don't understand me, I don't care where you get the money.
He barked as he walked.
And I couldn't care less about your family. You have to pay up.
He strode past, quickening his pace. Vitaly watched his retreating figure and let out a heavy sigh. Another person, another lost soul. The stranger in the coat hurried on, paying no attention to the long, jagged scar, like a wound that had barely healed, that had somehow appeared on his left cheek just below his eye. Near the bridge stood a man and a woman, locked in an argument. The woman's face was sorrowful, resigned. Tears streamed down her cheeks, yet the young man seemed indifferent. Unintentionally, Vitaly had become a witness to a dispute that would forever shatter a family.
I'm sorry, Masha, but we can't be together anymore. I've fallen in love with someone else. Forgive me. Let's handle the divorce peacefully. I'll even pay for the abortion.
Horrible words, absurd and insane. Vitaly walked past, though every fiber of his being burned with the urge to punch the man in the face. It would have been the right thing to do, but the man wouldn't have understood. Yes, people don't understand what they're doing. They reject moral lessons and ignore advice. As sad as it is, they refuse to learn from the mistakes of others, preferring to make their own. The man and woman were too consumed by their own problems to notice that something was wrong with the passing stranger. A sudden, searing pain twisted through Vitaly's body, nearly dropping him to the ground. He barely managed to grab onto the back of a nearby bench to keep from collapsing. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his body convulsing as though in agony. It felt as if an unknown fire was burning a strange pattern into his chest. No one rushed to help. No one even offered a hand. They simply walked around him, taking a different path. Vitaly clenched his teeth and endured the pain, hunching over on the bench. It took him about 10 minutes to recover before he carefully unbuttoned his coat and lifted his sweater. A crude, blackened wound had spread across his chest like a grotesque stain. Exhaling heavily, he pulled his coat back together, stood up from the bench, and headed toward the bridge. Wounds like these were always hard to bear, and they lingered in memory for a long time, leaving behind an unpleasant aftertaste in the soul and a terrifying, boundless emptiness in the heart. The man shook his head. No, he wouldn't wish such a fate on even his worst enemy. Never. Then again, everyone would go through it, eventually, sooner or later, if not in this life, then in the next. One day, they too would walk through a park or down a city street, perhaps even along the sunlit alleys of some exotic paradise island, and they would meet people, different in skin color, faith, and beliefs, yet still the same. Still human.
Excuse me, may I take your photo?
Vitaly snapped out of his thoughts and looked up in surprise at a young man standing on the bridge with a camera. Me?
Yes, if you don't mind. How should I put it?
The young man hesitated.
You fit perfectly into the composition with your presence. This bridge, the atmosphere around it will gain an entirely different framing.
A faint smile touched Vitaly's lips. I don't mind, he said, pausing to rest his hand on the railing.
A moment.
The young man adjusted the focus on his camera and took several shots.
Great. Can I take a few from another angle?
Of course, the man agreed again. How should I stand?
Please, turn your head slightly to the right and gaze into the distance, as if you're admiring the majestic beauty of the city from the bridge. Oh,
The young man suddenly faltered.
I'm sorry. I didn't think. You're blind. Forgive me.
I'm not blind, Vitaly adjusted the frame of his glasses. You all are. The young photographer lowered his camera, embarrassed. A few moments passed before he hesitantly spoke.
I didn't mean to offend you, truly.
For a brief moment, the man raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, palms up. Young man, I never take offense at those who do not understand the world around them. The young man took a few more shots.
What do you mean?
Life, simply life, and the actions of people within it. The stranger leaned against the railing, freezing in a contemplative pose. The camera continued to click, but Vitaly seemed unaware of it, lost in thought. I had everything, my own business, a car, a beautiful wife, children. I was in great shape, worked out at the gym. But like so many in this world, I thought only of myself, my own well-being, and the prosperity of my family. I cared little for others. Whether they existed or not, it made no difference to me. And sometimes I had to do things that were not entirely humane. Step over people, hurt them. The young photographer kept snapping pictures, captivated. When the stranger spoke, his scarred face took on an almost flawless quality, growing more photogenic with every word. Vitaly fell silent.
And then what?
The young man dared to break the monologue. Then I died, and now I must pay for it. For every unkind act committed by the people I encounter, the man suddenly chuckled. A little lesson from my past life, paid for with another life, in which I am the person you see before you. I am poor. I am not accepted into university. No one will hire me. An awkward pause filled the air. A second later, the young man silently pulled out his wallet and handed the stranger some money.
I can't say I believe everything you're saying, but here, take this. At least I can help you in some way.
Money, the stranger shook his head. People always think that by giving money, they are helping someone. They are convinced that it solves all problems. And to be honest, I used to think the same way in my past life. But unfortunately, sometimes we gain clarity far too late. Noticing the young man's mixed emotions and hint of confusion, Vitaly gave him an encouraging smile. One you'll understand what I mean. Sorry for spilling my heart out like that. I just needed to talk, and you turned out to be a good listener.
So what should I do if this is all true, if after death, things really happen the way they did for you?
Well, then remember one simple thing, just in case. Everything comes back eventually, do you understand? Everything, the good and the bad. And sometimes the price for the bad is too high. Vitaly pointed to his scars.
Oh, remember, thank you.
Don't mention it. You know, they say that there's no such thing as a chance encounter, the stranger smiled. So thank you too.
For what?
But Vitali was already walking away. The hem of his black coat fluttered in the wind, and his left cheek, where just a moment ago a long, jagged scar had marred his face, was now smooth and unblemished, like a newborn's skin. He knew the young man with the camera would never forget their conversation, and he would tell his children about it one day, and then his grandchildren, raising them to be true human beings.